Good evening. Welcome. We are so pleased to invite everyone to this conversation tonight. My name is Renee Battle-Brooks. I am the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Our office investigates complaints of civil rights violations. We do work in combating human trafficking in the region. We ensure equitable language access to county government resources. We provide engagement opportunities on matters of social justice, like tonight. With me tonight as co-host is Kyla Hannington. She is our Public Outreach and Engagement Division Manager. So we are thrilled. Tonight, we have a very special guest. We have Dr. Qamar-ul Huda and his new book. Let me make sure it's on screen there. Reenvisioning Peacebuilding and Conflict Resolution in Islam. It's brought to you and everyone in partnership with our Prince George's County Memorial Library System. Now, usually we have bios and we try to make them shorter, but tonight we really want you to hear the fullness of this so that you understand. So I have some water because it's long. So here we go. Let me take a sip before we start. This is important. So Dr. Qamar-ul Huda is the Michael E. Paul Distinguished Visiting Professor of International Affairs at the United States Naval Academy. So right here in our backyard. Previously, he served as an associate adjunct professor at Georgetown University's School of Government. Dr. Huda co-founded and was the vice president of the Center for Global Policy, a nonpartisan think tank that focuses on U.S. security and foreign policies in the Middle East, South Asia, Central Asia, and East Asia region. Dr. Huda was a senior policy advisor for the U.S. Department of State Secretary's Office for Religion and Global Affairs, where he focused on civil society, religious communities, and diplomacy with non-government organizations. His areas of focus were civil society organizations, education, multilateral affairs, mitigating the violent extremism. The U.S. Department recruited Dr. Huda to be a secunda, I think I pronounced that, but he will tell me, diplomat. He had to educate me about what that meant, as the first director of the Department of Dialogue and Collaboration to Hidayah, the International Center for Excellence for Countering Violent Extremism, based in Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. For 10 years, he worked at the U.S. Institute of Peace, a congressional-funded institute to reduce and prevent global conflict, Department of Religion and Peacemaking, as a senior expert, researcher, and resident scholar of religion and global politics, focused on conflict resolution, peace building, research, religious peace building, and field training to civil society members. He supervised and managed the development of the field of conflict resolution and mediation studies in public schools in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and various parts of the Middle East. Dr. Huda served as a director of the Countering Violent Extremism Project at U.S. Institute of Peace, where he designed, developed, and implemented numerous online training courses for U.S. Institute of Peace, their Academy of Conflict Analysis and Conflict Transformation. I need a drink of water. I'll be
You can stop whenever you feel like it.
No, this is excellent. This is excellent stuff. Everybody needs to understand because it really helps to set our conversation. At the United States Naval Academy, Dr. Huda teaches courses on Afghanistan, U.S. diplomacy and conflict studies and conflict resolution, foreign policy, and international relations. He has taught at UCLA, Boston College, Brandeis University, and the College of Holy Cross. Dr. Huda has published 3 books, 6 training manuals on conflict and mediation, religious peace building, and has 55 peer-reviewed articles on peace building, conflict resolution, comparative ethics, law, and education reform. He received research grants from the Social Science Research Council, the American Academy of Religion, UCLA's International Security Studies program, and was twice a Fulbright Scholar. He earned his doctorate from University of California, Los Angeles in political history, his Master's of Arts in political economy and history of Asia and the Middle East. He earned his Bachelor of Arts honors from Colgate University in international relations and philosophy and religion. Wow.
Yeah.
So that's wow. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are just very, very pleased to have you spend this hour with us. So before we start the conversation, we would love for you to sort of set the foundation for us.
Well, thank you very much for having me and inviting me to share my thoughts on my book, but generally on conflict and peace, what's happening in the world, and is there any hope? With what you see, and we hear. So thank you first for inviting me. I really praise PG County and your Office of Human Rights for hosting such conversations, and also hosting a local boy from Maryland to share his work. I think it's so important that we connect and we share our work. So maybe I can start why I wrote such a book and why it would help us. I think all of us, and even though a lot of the book is focused on international issues, international affairs, case studies from overseas, like 11 case studies. I think a lot of it we can bring home and think about how our own communities and societies in this election year we're polarized, right? We have things are not that rosy sometimes. But so I wrote this book. It took me about a little over 6 years, 6.5 years of research and writing, and I'm just interested in how and why, in the field from a conflict-based society, a conflict perspective, how different communities and societies think about conflict and how they frame it, and then how do they want to resolve their own personal conflicts. And so conflict, I should just say, it's from the very beginning, it's not just a war with bombs blowing up and bombs being thrown and we have refugees. That's a very sort of the penultimate of the curve, right? Of the high apex of the curve that says, wow, this has really gotten really violent and it's extremely at a very dangerous time. But conflict is usually a curve, and there's several types of conflicts, which is usually in a very basic definition is when one or two people have not the same goals, incompatible goals. Like they have the same goals at some time, like spouses or parents and children, but then something goes different. Like little Johnny wants to go out on Friday night, and we have a curfew at 9, but our son Johnny does not want to come back till midnight. So that would be a personal conflict or interpersonal conflict. And then it gets escalated, right, from between members of communities and leadership of communities, from institutions, let's say a parents, teachers, parents, that association, and let's say another association. So this, when goals don't really meet up, that's how I'm using the word conflict. And then you can say nationally, internationally, from country X, like United States and Canada, may disagree on something, or we can definitely Mexico and U.S. Disagrees on the border issue and how to resolve the migration issue. So those are conflicts because the goals, they know that there are problems and issues, but the goals of trying to resolve it are not usually well defined or well agreed upon. I said all that just to say that's always been fascinating me. It's always been fascinated. I mean, for some of us who grew up in a period like post-Vietnam, and I don't want to go back too far, but let's just say post-Vietnam. That's fair. That's fair. Because sometimes they say Vietnam for some of my students, and they think you're a dinosaur, right? And that's not fair.
It's not fair.
No. That's not nice. No. So, but yeah, so our country at post-Vietnam was really trying to heal itself. What can we do right? What can we do wrong? What to think about the wrongs? And the memorial, the Vietnam Memorial is one of those ways to acknowledge those soldiers that passed away and those who served. That's one way to doing something right, to correct the wrong. Memorials, peace memorials, rituals, acknowledging families, supporting families, and veterans, etc. So there are ways we our country does many things to help in doing a war. But if you're growing up that time, there's a lot of other things that were sort of kept under the rug. We didn't have a real national dialogue on so many things that were going on, whether it be race or gender or minority issues or unemployment issues or class issues or what the foreign policy that wasn't so how should I say was kept classified on the things our country was doing that wasn't, I guess, in a line with many of our citizens. We just didn't have a dialogue of and like so that's always bothered me or confused me. To be more honest, it wasn't a moral issue. It was confusing because we have all these real good strong institutions, but we just don't have sometimes a national dialogue on these issues, particularly on race and class and on labor and so forth. Anyway, so that is my background on why I focus on international conflict, because I just think there must be some. And when I first learned about conflict resolution, I was an undergraduate student, and then it's just like this massive field. It's just humongous, lots and lots of scholars, and a lot of practitioners, and wonderful institutions that do work that nobody acknowledges them, but we somehow are very quick to criticize them, like the United Nations, but I don't want, so and so forth and so forth. So I just thought, as I was studying international politics and conflicts, that one of the things that was happening, if I can say what was really happening in the post 60s until 2000s, was that in all of this, in conflict, resolving conflict, one of the things I found very interesting is that the role of religion was supposed to be sort of evaporate in thin air. Just because our country was supposedly becoming less and less religious, although it wasn't. I mean, even by 1990, I think Pew did a study that's saying 88% of Americans still go to church or go to some faith-based institution. This is on Sundays or Saturdays or something. This is in 1990. And so, but if you looked at the conflict resolution field or the international relations, most of the theories and professors said religion was really something of the past. It's something irrational. It has too many traditions and rituals that hold societies back. And all progressive societies will be democratic and won't want to hold on to religion. In fact, one professor had said that in order to be a very progressive country, that democratic society would have to get rid of religion. And these are professors that are well known and in the field of conflict resolution, and so that was a little. And these theories were sort of accepted because yes, they said, look at Europe, look how prosperous they are, look at U.S. and Canada, and in order to really see this, you really need to. So I found that a little strange because when I travel around the world, and most of the world is still very faith oriented. I mean, so whatever continent you went to, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia, North, even in the Soviet Union, as much as they tried to suppress religion, as soon as the wall fell, religion bounced way high. Right. So anyway, so this book is about really addressing how, well, also debunking the fact that, international relations, conflict resolution, embedded in sort of a world that religion is insignificant. I'm trying to show that no matter what, I just happen to choose Islamic, but if you choose the Hindu tradition, the Buddhist tradition, Christian tradition, Orthodox Christian, or Jewish tradition, you'll see that these traditions are very much alive and very much a part of people's identities, who they are, and part of what keeps them together as a community, their sense of purpose, their sense of commitment. a sense of direction. And yes, they also create peace, but they also add to conflict, right? So they they are on both sides of the sword. It could be used and abused. It can be manipulated. There are people who are bad actors who want to use and abuse religion for their own personal gain. But that's part of the conflict resolution. And um, so I took that and I said, for the bulk till 1999, I would say most of conflict resolution literature really negated the role of religion. It was only until like 2000, 2002, 3, when all this other pieces of literature or researchers were already saying, wait a minute. And then even the UN did not acknowledge this till like only to 2010 that religion has a role in conflict resolution. And it's just begin to have like faith-based thinking, and act and stakeholders come to the United Nations maybe by 2015. So it's really interesting to see even such a massive those organizations and the World Bank and the United Nations, the IMF, and some parts of the State Department to really say, hey, if we are fair to ourselves and to what we're trying to do in the world, we would acknowledge what's already there, because religious communities have enormous history, tradition, and vast networks, and they're embedded in every field. So education, hospitals, care, healthcare, orphanages. I mean, everything you can think of, right?
Yeah.
So, so it was about time that when I served in a State Department, that was the first time that the State Department created an office and said we're going to have a whole department, and it was because of Secretary Kerry who took an interest in this and said we need to be sensitive to the world that has religious actors and stakeholders. So that Office of Religion and Global Affairs was actually an office that responded and directly answered to him because he wanted to know what we're doing. So anyway, from that, I this whole book came about. So I just studied 11 cases around different parts of Muslim majority minority communities from North Africa, Middle East to Philippines, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Tunisia, and Libya, and to just say, and Iraq, of course, and some other places, and say, I want to interview men, women, youth, not just the high level politicians. To me, that's just one level of group of people, but this focuses on the ground. What do non-governmental NGOs do, right? Civil society, as they call them, civil society, air quotes. How do they think about conflict, and how are they resolving it, and what resources do they use, and without any fanfare, and without making the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're doing fantastic work. And so that's what my book really talks about: their concepts, their practices, the way they dialogue, the way they create dialogue, the way they design, and they also self-critique themselves and say, "Hey, what did we do wrong too?" So that's just an intro. I think I went on too long. Now I need a drink of water.
No, that was. I do have a question while you're drinking your water. Just something that you said at the end. I'm curious, as you traverse through the different countries and cultures,
Yeah.
How easy or how difficult it was to gain access to those that weren't the leaders up here, and those that perhaps don't have as much value in a particular culture to really get their view.
Yeah, I just would say I'm very fortunate to have kind people and who want to open doors and networks, and they say, yes, this should be covered. I said, this village and this remote area, and is it Pakistan or Libya? The woman, I hear there's this women's group, and so someone would help me take me there, or someone else would actually coordinate and facilitate these conversations. But to Donna's truth is, wherever you travel in the world, you do need to. One needs to be careful and say, this is who you are. You're a researcher. I'm not a government person doing this, and I'm not spying. I'm not. I'm writing a research. I'm collecting information to then analyze it and for a book. And so these interviews are not, any government purposes. So you do need to help. You do need to register yourself to all these countries and what you're doing. So to be honest,
yeah. Did you ever feel unsafe or a little you know,
Yeah, yeah.
hesitant, like, even though I've said this is what I am and what I am not, it doesn't keep people from being suspicious or creating their own narrative.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think I've become accustomed to people following me,
Yeah.
coming as wanting to sit next to you very closely in the lobby of a hotel.
Right.
So who became my good friend. I'm like, oh sure, because I have nothing to hide. I'm not doing anything wrong,
Right.
and I feel like although they have to do their work right as intelligence people or whatever they have to do, that's their job to make
Yeah.
sure people who are visiting are not causing trouble. I understand that, so I respect their laws. I respect their customs,
Yeah.
and anyone who did not want to be part of this interview, that was fine too. And again, but usually once they see and they just do a little research on me background. I've been writing on this field for not close to like 20 years, and so there's not much to hide. Yeah.
Right. No, that's great. I'm sorry, Kyla, go ahead. I just wanted to.
No, it's all good. This is great. There is a comment I want to share which says it's good to hear something positive can come from religion. 100 generations of ancestors can't be all wrong.
Okay. Let's leave a little room for some wrong. Correct. So self-reflection, maybe. I agree. But can I just say to that we I think have grown to accustomed to think religion is a source of conflict. Right? It is the source of conflict. And anytime you mention Rwanda or Israel Palestine or Libya or something, it's people I've found here say, yeah, religion is the reason. But there's study after study almost every 5 to 6 years from going back to 1995 that religion is less than 5% of the reasons why people are in conflict.
Yeah.
It's resources, right? It's water, electricity, tribal issues, gender issues, and it's there's international based issues, local issues. Anyway, I just want to say it's been sort of a bias to think that it is the reason for almost every single conflict, but it's not.
No, I agree. And I'm sorry, Kyle, I said I was not going to say, but I just had a comment. I agree with that. I spent some time in Lebanon, and it was twice during the war. The so-called civil war, I think was more of a proxy war, but people, when I came back to the States, thought it was a religious war. But from my perspective, on the ground, it wasn't. It was very much political of a bigger nature. We don't have to get into it now, but you're right that is the easy go-to or fallback.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's dimensions to it. And I think the way it's presented in the newspapers, and then, people parachute in, they get what they want, and they write some things. But so this is sort of all these sort of, how would we say, all these sort of uncomfortable things that are from the 80s and 90s that seem so odd, that religion was supposed to disappear. It's a source of conflict. It's not at all helpful for peace. That essentially there's in order to reduce conflict, we have now this rules based. We're just going to apply this cookie cutter way to do it here. And what we did in let's say this region, let's say in Bosnia, well, that could work. And that's the truth. I would find the same people who worked on Bosnia on the Rwanda conflict. And I would find them later, they moved to the Darfur. And then I would find the same people working on Afghanistan. I'm like, wait a second. There are, I understand the industry and I understand your passion, but you can't just bring these sort of established things that you come up with at headquarters in New York City or DC and say this is going to work in a village outside of Kabul, Afghanistan. So, and I would have these debates like in Afghanistan with them. It's like, well, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. I was like, well, how culturally sensitive is it? How religiously sensitive is it? How much are you including of local resources? Oh, yeah. And that would get them annoyed because they know that what I'm suggesting would take a longer work.
Yeah, but that's the lasting effect. Anyway, sorry, I'm now muzzling myself.
No, you don't have to. This is great. I'm loving it. So don't worry about me. But I took a bunch of quotes, and it's funny because I think we've covered so much, like some of these quotes I have. But I am going to read one from page 36, and it's the problem is that constructing peace building approaches from Western idealism and imposing those ideals onto another geographic place and culture who, at another pace of development, is asserting a new form of cultural idealism hegemony and imposing an assimilation of values, principles, and ideals. And when I read, and that's early, and that's page 36, like early in the book. And I looked at that, and it was like, I think a lot of us have heard of, cultural relativism. And I started twice. I like to say, I feel like this is a record that I twice started a master's degree in international human rights, which I'm not currently in. So if I ever get it, it will be 3 times the term. And also looking at human rights from an international perspective and not trying to impose, there's this talk about doing this. But for me, when I read this about peace building and thinking about how we do that, well, some people do that. I mean, obviously you're not all people do that, but without bringing in or thinking about or being curious about other ways of being and doing. And so when I read it, it seemed so obvious, but it took reading it for it to like the light bulb to go on over my head.
Well, thank you. And when you read it, when you read it, it sounds better than when I wrote it. It sounds with so much authority. I mean, so beautiful.
I see a contract coming for Kyla to be the what is it called?
The audiobook. I'll do the audiobook for you. Yeah.
Well, I think, and then I continue after that, just saying, I mean, what I think I'm saying is it's. I think a lot of us know what we just said, that you can't just take something and bring something somewhere else, and everyone else is in a different place, different pace, different world of development and thinking, have their own connection to the past and their idea of the future, right? And yes, they may be in a sort of in a conflict, and some of the opportunists of their countries, like, come on in UN, come on in State Department, come on in UK, and all these different donor agencies, come on in, because yes, it brings in lots and lots of funds and resources and jobs, but because you're being invited, I think we need to be careful in that process, all right? And I also then say, and right after what you just said in 36, 37, it's like how peace building organizations around the world. I mean, we in the sort of DC, Maryland, Virginia, we call them. We all know the term, the Beltway Bandits, right? Yeah. So that's a term we use for organizations that are sort of very established here in the Beltway in DC, and are constantly getting all these government contracts, which that's the way it works, and they're very aware of it. They provide a service, and so the government relies on them from all different types of sectors, right? But within the aid world, and I was trying to make a point that our government purposely uses certain companies as a way to say, we want you to operate here in XYZ and build a school, the continuous schools, build a road, or whatever. But that's what I'm saying is called soft power. A way a country uses soft power to exert its relationship. And this relationship is never an equal relationship, let's be honest. You're talking about billions of dollars coming into a new economy, or maybe less than $1 billion. And so that relationship's not there, because then the host country is always worried that you're going to just pop up one day and leave, right? Yeah. And so there's a gravy train, it stops. But that use of soft power, of using civil society in another country and funding these NGOs, funding these different groups, which I think in a lot of ways does wonderful work. But we also know we want them to be more inclined to be our friends. And also sometimes that causes tension locally, because I've talked to and interviewed hundreds of people. It's like, this puts me in a bad spot. If I take a $50,000 grant and I'm sitting in country X, my local host government, what they want to cut Right? Their intelligence people are now interviewing me and are hounding my family, and so there's a ripple effect, right? When we're funding another group of people, and it puts them in an awkward, very sometimes dangerous position.
Yeah. Huh.
We don't tend to think about that, but and then so, as we can see when we left Afghanistan, right? We funded, I mean, many hundreds and hundreds of new civil society groups, right? And we know that, but they were in a lurch when we left, and they were on their own. We saw that on TV. We try to bring them, sponsor them, but many of them became refugees, and some did come, and so forth and so forth. But that's an extreme situation. I'm just saying that we've cultivated this new civil society for the point of that it will help their country. But when we left, there were a lot of other things that had to leave too, that crumbled. Yeah.
So what's the solution? I mean, it is complex.
It is a very dicey issue within the donor world. There is a whole new group of people think this is they think this is neo-colonialism, that they become so dependent on these funding and on this aid that there's a whole industry in the other country, and they become codependent, and so they never end up doing things on their own. Really, they're doing it for the contract, right? So hey, we need 100 teachers, or for this school or for this village, but when that's over, did they learn how to become self-sufficient? Will they be self-sufficient? Or that's the key question. So, and so, although there are other countries that refuse international aid, and they said we're not going to be dependent on international money, on donations, because that compromises our independence. So you just have to be aware of that.
I think it was
go ahead.
I just like the theme of working, like first of all, recognizing what is already happening on the ground in these locations. And when I say these locations, that would be true anywhere. It's like also like, talk about Maryland, right? Like what's already happening on the ground, who are the people who are doing the work. And so when you're coming from outside to whatever region you're going to recognize and connect with and honor and respect the people who are already on the ground doing the work. That's what I felt was like such a theme throughout here, is like recognizing what is happening in community already.
Yeah. And also recognizing that maybe we have lots of this here, but also around the world. If there's like a 12th century piece of architecture, like outside your village or in your village, something from the 12th century or some 2,000-year-olds or whatever, there's a stronger sense of that history in that person or in that community. And so when they say tradition, they see themselves actually situated in that tradition, and they're continuing it. And, so it's very interesting. At this moment, it may be difficult. They may be, experiencing drought, conflict, famine, whatever it is, right? Some horrific conflict. But those institutions remind them that there's a past, there's a glorious past, and from that they will move forward, and they remember how the past. With their recollection of some past is that it was very important. It was important leaders who protected their countries and their land, and that's on their shoulders, and they will also, this moment, this chapter of this conflict shall pass, and we'll get to that peace. So I'm just saying that the tradition is reinforced by all the things around it, all the buildings and historical pieces, the language, music, folklore.
Yeah, when you say that, kind of related to that was I wanted to talk just a little bit about, and you talked about it actually on page 34, but really how the trend of our Western inclusiveness can complicate, if not exacerbate, problems for peace building, right? Especially within Muslim majority communities. I just think that's really helpful for us to unpack, because it is kind of, as you're talking about, juxtaposing our our way of thinking and
Mm.
believing in a place where, as you said, there may be this 2,000-year-old, traditions and things that are steeped and deep. But yeah, just discuss that. I would love to
Yeah,
have our audience understand that.
I think I'm touching on. Thank you for bringing that up, and it's actually a critique for all of our sort of civil society NGO groups who operate in the capitals of the West, and we all know that they are heavily dependent on how they stand out in the market, right? And which is perfectly fine. It's normal. Like, and sometimes what I find astonishing is that what they put in their what I was trying to say here, in their brochures or in their glossy brochures and their aspirations and what they think they're doing in peace building, let's say in Latin America or in Africa. And some of them want to, again, I even cite it, so I'm not making this up, that they are against some things that seem perfectly fine in terms of the progressive world here in the U.S. Perfectly fine to say we want complete equality and equity. Perfectly fine to say in progressive circles, right, that this is the world we want, where there's fairness and access to judiciary, of course. But sometimes we see lines like we want to destroy all patriarchy, and we want to, and I cited, we want to end all patriarchal systems. Now, if you're coming from a progressive NGO, that's perfectly fine language for your organization. Your board approves that. You work there. That's what you want to do. But to then sort of project that overseas or to another society and culture where there is patriarchy and there are tribal systems and there are tribal groups, and then you find one or two individuals who will work with you, or several individuals operating within that patriarchal system or tribal system or network of tribal systems. My point was that sometimes I think we need to be a little careful, because those individuals are probably very happy that they have this contact with you in Washington, D.C. You're going to fund them. You're going to bring a certain amount of peace building programs. I'm just trying to remind people in the book that could jeopardize their work, their lives too. And it also could jeopardize your activities in that country, because those countries and their politics will see you as a threat. And so you could be doing more damage by not thinking the words you use, or your sort of particular values may not actually match with local values. And so I'm just trying to bring some sort of careful reflection on that topic.
Yeah. Well put. Yeah, Kyla.
Well, I was really interested in this section. We have a couple of sections on peace education and like the strategic planning and development and implementation of peace, like into education systems across a variety of ages.
Yeah.
So I'd love for you to talk about that generally, and then I do have a couple of questions. But can you, again, for people who haven't read it yet, can you talk a little bit about this?
Sure. Peace education is a very established curriculum for almost 8 decades maybe. It's actually a thinking that came about in the late 60s to say that if we have a curriculum that talks about what it means to be peaceful, what brings peace, how to achieve peace, what are the indicators and structural ideas that does not bring peace. So there's a whole have an analysis towards conflict and peace. And actually the UN has adopted many peace education curriculum, and they want this taught in a lot of world conflicts. Many institutes of peace will say, yes, if we just teach more peace, then the local population will understand how to analyze and self-critique and say what to do to respond to conflict, right? So that's perfectly fine, and I think it's more established. And I've actually been hired as a contractor by the UN to be a peace educator and trainer and so forth. And again, I have a chapter on why it's so important. And I think what it does, again, the whole thing, and my contribution to this world is just say your peace curriculum again does not take the cultural and religious dimensions of these countries. right? So, it's so absent of the cultures and religions of these cultures, and it just seems something's coming out of Switzerland. It's beautiful. I love it. How to be tolerant, right? I want to teach how to be tolerant, be pluralistic, how to be accepting. How do you know when you're not accepting? Of course, these are things, but wouldn't it be more important if somehow that was converging with existing values, local values, and it builds upon, if not starts with those values, and to remind people of their own that and those values that you in this country, while in conflict, but you guys already have beautiful peace building habits and traditions. So when I say that, I think some folks don't like to hear that. Because, that's fine. I mean, I just think it's important to remind people, and I mean, be very. I mean, it's important to say that if you're dealing with an Orthodox Christian community, and those values are still strong, and people go to church 6 days a week, how can you ignore that in a peace building project? You have to talk about that. If not, I'm not saying you have to find a priest and say, toss them in the classroom. I'm saying acknowledge that. What are their values? Let them teach you about what are those values, instead of coming with a sort of a baggage of, a core curriculum. So I work on that, and I say peace education is an enormous contribution. But I also say there's something, what I found was something called Islamic peace education programs, where there are local communities came up using their own religious tradition and say, hey, from our tradition, these are the things that says we to reduce conflict, how to prevent conflict, how to be more kind to people and compassionate, to recognize when things are not going right, and to not avoid it, but to address it. So that's in this peace education, Islamic peace education curriculums that I found from Libya to all the way to Philippines and in Indonesia. So, and it's fascinating, actually. I think that may be even sort of a response to the UN imposition of what is peace, peace education. So that the local community said, this is all nice and dandy, but we want to create something from our own tradition. And so that scholars did that.
Yeah, I had this whole part about, like, I found that this whole section super interesting, and the peace education initiative in Libya that you and then I was so interested, first of all, what was happening, but then the reporting that you did on the outcomes, like how people perceived, like what the feedback was, which I think you've actually touched on. I think some of that pretty clear feedback.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think people, the teachers, and I should just step back and say, whenever any institution comes to another host country and say, we'd like to think about a curriculum, you have to go through the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and different education councils. To touch another country's education is serious business, right? I mean, it's like if, the Canadians came into our country, it's like, what, I don't, with all your funny, great, your schooling is really messed up. You take offense to it. You're just like, wait a second, we know what we're doing. And so also happens in all around the world. And just because they're in conflict does not mean they have any less dignity or integrity or sense of purpose. They're actually going to be more protective of their education system, because they know that is the one institution that's going to elevate them out of the situation, out of this, and bring them to a peace building moment. I mean, we saw this with Nelson Mandela. The amount of energy spent on education and informing education and getting so forth and so forth. It's really important not to think that any country can just go, oh, we'll just throw around $100,000 here for $500,000 here, and they will just do whatever you want. But the results were from that particular case is that this is all fantastic, but the teachers felt they were stuck in the middle because they were trained in this peace education, but and they had to stick to it. But they felt that some principals or the administrators were not so invested in it, so they were just doing this out of the motion. And then some were just saying that the ministry would say, "Don't make this succeed. We don't want this to succeed. We don't want the UN project to be successful. We want them out of here as soon as possible. So when in the heart and I should say in the trenches, if I can say that, teachers and students may have loved it, but then there's all this politics that's happening, international politics that's happening.
We have a question actually
Okay.
that I'm going to share, and then Renee, I'll give it back to you. So what is peace? Does the definition vary from culture to culture? Great question.
Yeah, it does. There are different cultures, and the peace field has a definition. I can tell you one of the things that made me really dissatisfied working at one of the institutions you mentioned in my bio. And I would, because they would say, oh, one senior folks would say, living in peace meant to be able to have critical thinking, or to be able to critique others, or to have the freedom to critique others.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I think and then that's what we're about, because basically, yeah. And I since then it's been bothering that since 2006. So, and then we're in the middle of Iraq War, Afghanistan War, and there were already 60 other different types of conflicts. So, living in peace has a whole different dimension to that definition. And what I found, can I just share what I think people have told me in these cases in Muslim majority countries? It's peace is actually a desire that has like approaches, and it's not something you're like a progressive line you're reaching for the stars. It's something very real and here in the moment. It's and in that identity, it has your faith, it has your culture, has your language, has your tribal values. It has all of this holistic way of saying we are able to accept ourselves and others who have different outlooks. And it's also meaning that we are going to recognize that sources of peace may be our spiritual tradition. And sources of peace may not be from our profession, like I got to be a doctor or I have to be a lawyer. That may be a source of satisfaction to achieve. But the source of peace may not be in the material world or materialism, or agendas of groups. But it's actually in for what I've learned is it's living in peace means to have a vision of living where there's a transcendental connection to something beyond. Your inner spiritual life is connected to something bigger, to that's something sacred. And in this connection, you're being asked to create a peaceful life in this world. So, and it's also protecting, while you're living in peace, protecting that which is sacred, and that human beings know that they need to protect and preserve sacred things. So, life, protect other lives, protect other people's lives, protect their property, your property, dignity, integrity, and so forth. So that's what. So not being exploited. Should I go on? Not to exploit other people. So yeah. So it's a very deep philosophical and theological. Something peaceful is a pathway of transcendence, of connecting the inner world and the outer world, and it's also engaging with people and also all of creation, in our environment, and protecting the environment too, and culture and tradition and all of those things. So that's what everyone has said, and far more sophisticated ways than I just shared with you.
It
opens so many doors. Yeah.
Renee, I said I was going to give it back to you, but I was going to take one more second.
That's good.
This actually leads to a quote two quotes from 235. And it says, in service, we ask ourselves, who is the self in relation to others? The call to service is about consistent engagement with others to situate our lives with those who need another person. And a little bit farther down the page, it says, the call to service is not just doing good for a reward in the hereafter, or earning a reward to enter heaven. Instead, the service is heaven in our time.
Mm.
And I just absolutely love that. And as you were talking about peace and that, like your, what you just spoke to about that really made me think of this part about like the service, that the service itself is the heaven in our time.
Yes, yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. So, yeah, I bring up a few things that I think is important to this trying to bring peace and think about peace and ethics and peace and so I believe that there's like sort of we should tap into our moral imagination for thinking outside the box. And what is our moral imagination? So also there's a moral imperative, see and hear things and see awful things, not things that don't appear right. So how do we respond, right? But also when there's something incorrect, is there an imaginative world that we should tap into and say, how do we really resolve this? And what are our priorities? What are the opportunities? What are capabilities? If we can't do it, maybe help get others and their resources and their networks. But service to me is one of the most important things. And I also studied in all these other traditions from Buddhism, Christianity, and Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism, and all these other traditions. Serving the community is not just something that just comes up as a hey, I have some time. It's really embedded in their tradition, in their lives. It's really embedded in their identity, to help and support those. And that act, it just becomes like a second nature of who they are to intervene if something looks wrong, to intervene, to find a better way, to serve is not to think about, like you said, well, maybe I said it. I don't know who said it, but I think later in that book, I quoted Daniel Berrigan. If anyone knows Father Berrigan, Father Berrigan's passed away, but he was again one of my heroes. He was an anti-war priest, Jesuit priest, and he wrote a few books. Wrote a dozen books. One was with a Buddhist priest, a Buddhist monk. But Daniel Berrigan, I quote him on that because he wrote a thing about why it's important that we have a geography of faith. What is our faith and how it is related to all these other things around us. So, yeah, the Jesuits are very interesting people. So,
fascinating.
Yeah.
I wonder, during your 6-year journey of writing this book and the research, and you've been in this field, you're an expert in this whole industry. Was there something unexpected, whether good or bad, that you came upon?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That is such a great question because I know towards the end we say these things. And you know what I'd like to, particularly within Islamic communities, but also I can say outside, I don't think we have enough, and when we self-examine how we can do better, what's authentic engagement and so forth, we don't have enough reconciliation. I mean, maybe people like to do it inside their homes. I don't know. But communities need to have reconciliation and have truth and reconciliations and forgiveness of when things have gone wrong. Like, I don't recall countries ever apologizing for invading another country. What is wrong with an apology? I mean, in some cultures, like in Japan, I'm not sure if you remember, there was an airplane that went down in the ocean, and they had this whole reconciliation process where the CEO, the CFO, and staff members went to each home of the Japanese families, and they went there. And it's just remarkable, just how they stood there and they got yelled at and screamed at and cried at. It's just remarkable. And they went to all 300 homes and all the families. But I would think that that's a sort of acknowledgement that our company failed your family, right?
Yeah.
And and it's not just writing a check. That this is something human. We need to connect humanly and say we apologize. We could do better, and we will do better. And I think we need to do that also with so many things, because I just think that we in the field of comedy, that is like the foundation to moving forward.
Yeah.
Hearing through dialogue, some sort of process of where you recognize your pain is recognized.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be validated, but we know the other. And so a lot of people say, "Oh, you'll never get that recognition," and so forth. But I think it would be nice to move towards there, because I find it helps individuals or communities to think about reconciliation and beyond, and building resilient communities afterwards. A new type of resilience. Yeah.
It's such a human emotion. We do want to hear, right?
Yeah.
It does. It helps us heal. So it just seems so obvious, right? But
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that sometimes if between me and my spouse, if I don't hear I'm sorry, or if I don't say I'm sorry, it's still going on, right?
well, and that's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, so you have to. I mean, if we can do that on a personal level, I don't know why we can't move beyond the privacy of our individual lives and say this is actually is for a better society.
Yeah. I wonder what it would take. I wonder what it would take.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, anyway, right. You have so many other influences. No, you can't say that. It's going to cost money because then, right. But to get past sort of our framework in the West, especially in the United States, sometimes that does get in the way because the lawyers are saying, no, you cannot acknowledge, you cannot, right. But anyway,
but just even bring it home locally. Like, how many prisoners are imprisoned, and then they find out after decades that they were illegally detained and they spent most of their lives, and who says sorry? I mean, is there a reconciliation process? Is there a forgiveness process? Is there I mean, and then sometimes they may have to go through the legal routine, and we know that doesn't really give you so anyway, I just think it's possible to it's absent in our judicial system. But it's not absent in some of the spiritual traditions, where inside the churches or in places, people do say sorry to each other on a very common basis.
Yeah.
And apologize. Yeah.
There is a move in the judicial system for that. But it's not everywhere, and it's limited, but yeah, it does. Yep. The human soul needs to hear that.
And I think I was speaking with, and I was just so touched by when Justin Trudeau said that he was sorry to what do we say in America, the Native Americans, but he just brings tears when he did that speech, and it wasn't that long. It was like 6-7 minutes, and it was just very touching. So
yeah. Well, Kyla,
I know. So I definitely feel like we should talk for another hour, but I will say that time has come to an end, unfortunately. But I do want to take a few minutes. We will go a little bit over 8, so I hope people who are watching stay with us. This book is absolutely fantastic. It's so interesting. There's so much to it. It's as I hope you've heard tonight, it like there's just line after line that just really hits home, and you're like, oh wow, that makes so much sense. And it's I didn't think of that. It's so interesting. So I really recommend all of you who haven't had a chance to read it yet to get your copy from your favorite independent bookstore. I also put a link to the publisher where you're watching. You can click on the link and go directly to the publisher. You can check out if your favorite library has it, and if they don't, ask them to order it. It's really worth reading. It's a great book. We want to thank our friends of the Prince George's County Memorial Library System for co-hosting this event with us, letting us use their platforms. Please visit them online, pgcmls.info, and visit us at civilrights.mypgc.us. We have tons of other wonderful events coming up, and we hope you can join us at some or all of them. And Dr. Huda, I cannot even tell you how great it is to have you back. It has been a few years, but this was just such a delight for us. And the book is really fantastic. So thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you for hosting me. Thank you for your nice praises. And it's been a wonderful conversation. And invite me anytime. Again, I'm around.
Okay, we will definitely, we are taking you up on that. You are booked. All right. So
Appreciate it. Thank
good
you.
night, everybody. Thanks so much.
Good night.
Good night,
Have a lovely
everyone.
night.
You too.